What is truth, and who are the deniers of truth? Truth is a kind of conformity. It's a conformity between intellect and things. There's a merging between the mind and the thing in question. Whereas error is a lack of conformity. There's a detachment, a separation between our thinking and what really is the case, what really is the nature of things. Now, those who are skeptical in the radical extreme about everything, and those who reject all first principles of logic, are really deniers of the truth. That's because they directly or indirectly believe we cannot access the truth. Moreover, lying and bullshitting, the liar attacks the truth, but so does the bullshitter. Now, my apologies for using the term bullshitting, but I'm using it in a technical philosophical sense. And I'm referencing Harry Frankfurt here in his book. Hi, I'm the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com, and as you can see, today we're going to briefly explore truth, certainty, subjectivism, skepticism, fallibility, lying, and bullshitting. Now, of course, we're all fallible. We err, we make mistakes, our cognitive faculties can fail us. Nevertheless, it really is important to note from the outset this is different from claims about whether the truth exists at all, or the issue of if we can have access to the truth. Just because we can make mistakes, that we make errors, doesn't imply that there's no truth or that we cannot access it. Now, people often say about politicians that he's lying. It's a normal occurrence. We're talking about politicians. But what does that presuppose? Well, it presupposes that there is a fact of the matter. It thereby presupposes that we do have access to the truth. It also presupposes an intention by the politician not to tell the truth. This raises a very interesting distinction, and the philosopher Harry Frankfurt has a very short book called On Bullshit, and I took a picture of my own copy there, and he argues that there's a distinction between lying and bullshitting. The liar knows he is telling an untruth, or what he thinks to be an untruth. Bullshitting, by the bullshitter, is an indifference to the truth. So here with bullshitting, there's an indifference to the truth. The liar is not indifferent, but the bullshitter doesn't care. The bullshitter may say something that's true by accident, but still be bullshitting. A bullshitter is kind of like someone bluffing. A bullshitter is a phony, and a phony can tell the truth. So lying and bullshitting are two different forms of misrepresentation, but both attack the truth in different ways. The bullshitter is indifferent, the liar is not. But in any case, both lying and bullshitting are morally wrong. The liar is not giving us the truth, but is knowingly giving us what he takes to be a falsity. That goes against justice. It's being unjust to another person. Likewise, a bullshitter is giving us a wrong impression about what he's doing. He's being a phony, and being a phony to someone else is also to do a kind of social injustice. Now, in philosophy, it's a very interesting question, is lying always wrong? So Immanuel Kant thought that lying is always wrong. Thomas Aquinas thought that lying is always wrong. Are they right or are they wrong? That's a hard question. It's an interesting question, though, but not a question I want to explore presently. But in general, usually lying is wrong. I think we should all agree with that. We should not lie. That doesn't mean we should always tell the truth and always just say what's on our mind, so to speak. We can reserve our thoughts. We can shut our mouths, right? And often we should do that. But we shouldn't be lying and misleading people. That's wrong. And we shouldn't be bullshitting people either. Now, in philosophy, the biggest deniers of truth are the radical skeptics. But we have to be very careful here, and also as fair as possible. And I think there's a difference between the radical skepticism and the, what I'm calling common sense skepticism. The common sense skeptic is a good skeptic. It's a good thing not to believe in things too quickly without questioning them, right? If any politician is making some pronouncements, we should be skeptical by default, I would say. We should look to see if there's evidence that supports those pronouncements. So that's a good and very healthy form of skepticism. However, radical skepticism questions the very possibility to obtain any truth. It doubts everything. To be sure, it might be possible to verbally do this, but it doesn't seem psychologically possible to live a life of doubting and believing there are no truths whatsoever. Now, to doubt all things really is logically impossible, because then the question is, are you also doubting your doubting, so to speak? Obviously, if you claim that there are no truths, but that is a truth, that there are no truths, that's logically contradictive. So the proof against the global or radical skeptical view is saying that, hey, this position also has this affirmation that it is true that there are no truths, and so we have a contradiction, so this worldview has to be just false. Moreover, insofar as you're going to be doubting first principles of thought like the law of contradiction, well, that implies that two contradictories might be simultaneously true, but that's absurd, and because of that, this worldview must be false. So either we have a self-defeating nature, or that this is something that becomes totally impractical. If you try to play various chess moves, intellectual chess moves, to make this logically coherent, it becomes really impractical in daily life to believe that we have no access to the truth whatsoever. I mean, just look at the world around you. How do we build skyscrapers? How do we have these computers and technology if there's nothing known about the world, if we have no access to the world? Yet again, we have to be fair. Because, again, if we're making these chess moves, the radical skeptic can try to make their position not self-defeating. Maybe it will be impractical, but it's not self-defeating. Now, if the radical skeptic really doubts everything, does he believe this also applies to his very own philosophy? Maybe it does. Now, clearly, insofar as someone claims nothing is certain, but is certain that nothing is certain, again, that's a logically contradictory claim, to reiterate. So it's thereby self-defeating. Likewise, again, to repeat, if someone claims it is true that there are no truths, then we have another logically contradictory self-defeating claim. But a radical skeptic might instead claim, we know nothing, but I'm not claiming that we know that. That's an odd reply, to be sure. Very odd. And unpacking that still amounts to saying, it is true that I know nothing, but I don't know if it is true that I know nothing. So we really still have an implicit contradiction when we impeel things, it seems to me. And another big issue is that insofar as someone is giving any kind of argument for this type of radical skeptic view, there's an attempt to justify this position. But that's self-defeating. Because if the argument is any good, then we have reason to know something. So the argument is thereby contradictive. Alternatively, if the argument is no good, then we have no reason to accept the conclusion. And again, we should reject this worldview. Either way. And if the radical skeptic gives us no argument whatsoever for his position, then why should we take seriously this position anyhow? So the reasonable common sense skeptic should be skeptical of the radical skeptic. It is irrational, as a rule, to hold unjustified beliefs. So because radical skeptics claim there are no justified beliefs, including their own, their position is irrational and should not be held. Now, in general, through all this, we're really thinking about oftentimes reductio ad absurdum proofs, and those can be used to disprove a radical skeptical worldview. Even when it comes to more local skepticism, oftentimes I would say local skepticism opens a door to this more radical global skeptical view. So insofar as that is the case, we have arguments against local skepticism, at least in certain cases, but that's a whole nother video. But through all this, we do have some first principles, because there are certain self-evident principles to have any knowledge, and these are implicit in every judgment we make. Before you or me or someone else can even doubt, doesn't that imply the certain existence of a doubter? Think back to my YouTube series on the philosopher René Descartes. So while I'm very critical of him in that series, I also must admit that he does have a point in that any doubter to doubt must exist to doubt. Hence, any judgment being made presupposes the existence of a thinking subject. It also presupposes the principle of contradiction. If someone says that proposition P is true, then it follows that the molecular proposition not P is false. I cannot say both P and non-P are true because they cancel each other out, so to speak. If one is true, the other is false, and if one is false, the other is true. They cannot possibly be both true. And third, Any judgment presupposes the capacity to at least seek truth. Propositions are truth functional. They are not truth functional in vain. That's what the radical skeptic would claim. But we shouldn't be radical skeptics. Someone made the point to me that we cannot know for certain, for example, that the universe is an orderly place. We just have to look, and then we can find out that it is indeed an orderly place. And that's reasonable. I think we just had to hammer out our differences with more distinctions so that we could see that there's more agreement than disagreement between each other. However, with that said, things have reasons for doing the things they do. There are causes that bring about effects. There might be things out there that are unorderly, so to speak, but there's a reason or intelligible explanation about those things having existence rather than not having existence. Let me try to address this from another angle. People have argued through evolution that our intellect evolved out of fitness. However, there's no necessary connection between fitness and truth. Understanding was not essential for survival, so understanding the nature of things is not a part of our mental faculties. Illusion is good enough for us to reproduce and so forth. Nevertheless, the problem with this argument is that after any further analysis, it is self-defeating. If we are hardwired towards illusion, then the argument that this is the case can be illusory too. In any case, not every truth can be demonstrated. Some things are just self-evident, like the principle of identity, the principle of contradiction. We can illustrate it, but we're not going to prove it. This is just a first principle. They wear the truth on their sleeves. And to demand everything must be demonstrated will likely lead to a radical skeptical view. Now this foundation, because it is a foundation, in every judgment we have the existence of a thinking subject, we have the principle of contradiction, we have the capacity to seek truth. If you doubt them, then we're really saying no knowledge is possible, it seems. And again, we can't demonstrate them. These are really self-evident. And even if someone tries to deny them, the very denial must implicitly affirm them. So if I deny that I exist, well, the only reason I can do that is if I in fact exist, and so on and so forth. But what about certainty? So I would claim that certain first principles are self-evident, and we're certain of them. We're certain that 1 + 1 = 2, for example. Now, what does that mean? So certainty basically is a state of mind, and is hence subjective, right? In that sense, it's subjective. What any of us should want is a certainty that is objective. That is, it is actually true. 1 + 1 is objectively true. You're certain of it, and I'm certain of it. And we assent to it in an unambiguous, clear way. Now, in this feeling of certainty, we have a firm assent. 1 + 1 really is 2. Moreover, there's the absence of any rational doubt or fear. Someone can have an irrational fear. People do have irrational fears. Probably all of us do to some degree, unfortunately. And some individuals have phobias. But here, a lack of fear is just an acknowledgement that the opposite of the case is not the case. I exist. I have no fear that I don't exist. And finally, there should be an objective motive involved. That's essential. Again, we don't just want a subjective feeling of certainty. We want objective, genuine, real certainty. There needs to be objective evidence. Now, there are different types of certainty. In this world, we often don't have certainty. But there is metaphysical certainty, and that's just unconditional. To deny any such proposition will result in a contradiction. So 1 + 1 = 2 is a metaphysical certainty. The law of contradiction is a metaphysical certainty. A physical certainty is conditional. And you can deny it without any logical contradiction. The gravitational constant is what it is, but it might be different. This raises an interesting question about a miracle. Now, a miracle is not necessarily against the laws of nature. It's supernatural, not subnatural. A law of nature can be blocked by God, to be sure, but that's not a violation. So the existence of God, we can say, okay, with the existence of God, miracles are possible. That doesn't contradict physical certainties. So from this understanding, a miracle is beyond nature by addition or subtraction rather than contrary to it. And it's not just a mere intervention. God doesn't just get involved through miracles since he is always involved in every causal activity taking place. So think of a musician. Every note comes from God. He sustains the universe. God is involved when an apple falls to the ground from a tree. Sometimes he will suspend the laws of nature, but that is not a breach of it. Now, I am the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com, and this has just been an exploration of some topics about certainty and skepticism and other deniers of the truth, or those who attack the truth, so to speak, like the liar and the bullshitter. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like. I'm not exactly sure always the direction to take this YouTube channel, to be honest. I want to produce the next video on René Descartes soon, if I'm able to, hopefully within a couple of weeks. It might be a shorter video. The last one I had on René Descartes was really long. I'm going to try to shuffle things around in my schedule, so I don't know how that's going to affect this YouTube channel. At the same time, I do want to try to grow this YouTube channel and try to continue it as best as possible. And if you want to support me in this endeavor, leave a comment, subscribe, give this video a like, consider, buying me a cup of coffee. I would really appreciate it. And just thanks for watching, and I appreciate it.